Welcome to the Rational Egoist. I'm your host, Michael Leibowitz. I first came across the phrase emotional intelligence some 26 years ago when I was incarcerated, and it was in a catalog that was circulating through the block. And there was a book advertised called Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman. Several years later, I traded a book for that book and I was able to read it. And I found it to be very, very helpful in helping me to change, grow, and improve. And then recently, I read an article on the subject in Psychology Today. I reached out to the article's author, and she's here with us. Her name is Sandra Wartski, PSYD. She's a psychologist whose special interests include mood disorders, anxiety, and relationships. Dr. Wartski, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me.
So, if somebody asked you to give a quick summary of what emotional intelligence is, how would you answer?
I would say a good shorthand way to think about it is emotional literacy, knowing about your emotions and knowing how to use them. We all have emotions, but not all of us all the time know how to use them effectively and skillfully. That's something that sometimes does flounder. So, yeah.
And emotional intelligence also helps us to understand the emotional reactions of other people, right?
Absolutely, right. Yeah, part of the definition of emotional intelligence is knowing ourselves and knowing how to manage ourselves, but also knowing and understanding or attempting to be empathic to the emotions of others, understanding others, and then also knowing how to skillfully manage relationships with others or conflicts with others. So yes, it's fairly complex. It has several layers and levels. Yes, yeah.
In the advertisement for the book, Emotional Intelligence, well, something that stood out to me was they compared EQ to IQ, emotional quotient to intelligence quotient. So, first of all, what is emotional quotient and how does it differ from intelligent quotient, aside from the obvious that one refers to emotions and the other to intelligence?
Right. Yeah, so IQ, intelligence quotient, is probably a lot of people are familiar with that. Excuse me. Um, that's more about your cognitive processing skills, your verbal abilities, your perceptual processing abilities, your ability to learn. Um, when it comes to EQ or emotional quotient, or how Daniel Goleman, the writer of the book that you referenced, how he likes to talk about his EI, because that's really um, more accurate, actually, emotional intelligence. Because when we talk about IQ, people will talk about a number per se, but EQ is generally we talk about skills and different domains of functioning and skills. Um, one of the one of the big differences between EQ and IQ is that IQ is considered generally pretty static, pretty not changeable. So we often are born into this world with genetic makeup that really determines our IQ based on, our biological parents. EQ, yes, that can be affected by our families and our upbringing, but the very interesting thing about EQ is that it's very dynamic, it's very changeable. And that's kind of exciting for me as a psychologist, actually, that it is very changeable. And IQ and EQ absolutely work together. So they influence each other. But we think about often how without EQ, so somebody can be super smart, but without EQ, it might be really hard for them to apply some of their smarts. One of the things we sometimes talk about is how, you can sometimes get hired for your IQ, but then fired for your EQ, if your EQ is, because I think there's truth to that, right? So using your emotions for your intelligence, but then also using your intelligence for your emotions. So they work together, but they are very different concepts. Yeah.
This idea you just mentioned between dynamic and static holds special interest to me because in literature on how to rehabilitate criminals, they talk about static risk factors and dynamic risk factors. So, static risk
Mm.
factors would be the sex of the person that commits the crime,
Mhm.
the age at which a crime was first committed, the age at which a person is going to be released from prison. you can't change. Well, you could change the age he's going to be released, so I probably shouldn't have thrown that one in there. But the age of the first offense and the amount of offenses that have been committed, the sex of the offender, none of those can be changed. But they talk about also dynamic risk factors because those are the things that need to be addressed in order for the criminal to be rehabilitated. Things like attitudes, values, beliefs, choice of associates, education level. So when you're talking about this, the IQ, while a person's knowledge base can increase, some skills can increase, the general IQ stays roughly the same throughout life, but we can learn how to become more aware of our emotions, how to respond to our emotions, and how over time to even alter our emotional reactions to given situations. Now, you talk about in your article the four domains of emotional intelligence. I found that to be very interesting and very helpful. I actually sent
Mhm.
your article out to a couple of friends of mine. So, what are the four domains of emotional intelligence?
Yeah, so the four domains, and again, taken from, Daniel Goleman, the book you referenced, he actually popularized the term, but it actually was based on research done by some psychologists earlier, Salovey and Meyer. And the four domains that we generally talk about are that self-awareness. And in my article, the what part of what I do with my articles, I try to put a metaphor to make the different concepts of psychology and mental health maybe a little bit more memorable and understandable. So the metaphor I use for self-awareness is kind of like having special X-ray glasses for ourselves. So understanding how, which of course we don't really have, so we have to then use other skills to say, wow, okay, what's going on here? What's this anger about? Or what is this body sensation that I'm having? I need to figure out what's going on here. Or how do my past relationships possibly affect what's going on for me right now with this new relationship? So all of that's about self-awareness. And really it's such an important skill because if we're not self-aware, we it's really hard to do the other three domains. So it's a base of self-awareness. The second domain is in terms of self-regulation. And so again, also really important. So knowing that we feel anger or that we feel stuck is important, but if we then don't know what to do with it, it it leaves us a little bit more stuck or more angry or more disappointed. So, being able to be like, oh, I know how to relax, or I know how to calm down, or I know how to pause. And the pause is one of the skills that I consider to be, I mean, all of them are important and applicable in different situations, but knowing how to take a pause, like having a feeling and being able to be like, oh, wait a minute, okay, what's going on here? Can I take a breath? Can I take a step back? And so that's all about self-regulation. So those two, self-awareness and self-regulation, those are in the what we consider personal competence kind of skill area. And the next two domains are what we call more social competence domains. And so that would be other awareness. And so sometimes people call that um, empathy or being able to read the room or having awareness, being able to read, it might be, reading facial skills or reading facial, language or body language, knowing that if someone is having a reaction to you, what can you begin to have some outside perspective to okay, what's going on? What might I guess at? And then the second part, the social competence, is about relationship management. It's not really other management, but it's like how do I manage when I'm with someone? How, if someone else is upset, can I be validating? Can I show some empathy? If I'm in conflict with somebody, do I know how to effectively manage that conflict and not make it worse? So a lot of these are about, can we make it better, not worse? So self-management, other awareness, and relationship management. So those are the four domains.
So, all of those are vital. And I just will give you an example from my own life and my own
Yeah.
relationships. I have a friend, and our issues grate against each other. It's not that, I'm horrible for having my issue or she's horrible for having her issue, but what happens is the two clash. So, for instance, I absolutely cringe, or I get immediately angry when somebody asks me to do something and then complains about the way that I do it. That drives me nuts. I hate it. My friend is the type of person that has a problem with decisions. So she always second guesses the decisions she makes and the decisions others make. So she'll ask me, for instance, the other night she asked me to drive. So I said, I'll drive, fine. And it was bad out, it was raining, and I drove. But
Mhm.
then she complained about the way I was driving. Now, she was nervous because it was wet out and I'm not the best driver. So her complaint, it's understandable. But from my perspective, it's you didn't have to ask me to drive and you did. So the two sort of,
Yeah,
this would probably be a better metaphor, bump into each other.
right.
But because I've trained myself for decades now to be aware of my emotional reactions, why I have them. I'm able to now see that. So I identify what the issue is.
Hmm.
I can also go to the self-regulating part of it where I can say, okay, now what can I do to alter this? But I can also communicate the stuff to my friend so that she's aware of it. And then we can sort of work on overcoming it. It doesn't mean it won't happen again, of course, but
Hmm.
it does mean that when you're aware of it, you can actually move to fix it. I remember a quote from Dr. Phil, of all people, who I'm not a big fan of, but his quote I liked, and it says, "You can't change what you won't acknowledge."
Hmm. That's
And I
right.
think that that's a very important thing. And I actually was having a conversation with the same friend today about people in general. And well, it was about somebody specific, but I'm not going to bring the specific person in. But the point is generally applicable that if a person is in denial or has a interest in seeing themselves in a certain way, and that they begin to exclude information that's relevant, but that's not conducive to the self-image they try to keep up. And then you can't change ever because no conflicting info will be allowed into your sort of cost benefit assessments, your weighing of yourself and in what you want to be. One thing I don't know how to do is to help others to become self-aware. How do you do that? How do people become self-aware? Because it is something that's dynamic. You don't either have it or you don't. But
Yeah.
how would they do that? What is the process?
Yeah, well, it reminds me of the title of another metaphor article I recently did is how many therapists does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer to that riddle is only one, but they have to want to change. And, you know, like really, yeah, we may see and often we're better at seeing other people's issues than our own sometimes, right? And so we might be like, oh my gosh, she needs to stop complaining about when she asks
Yes.
somebody to do something, right? Like, and sure, you using communication skills would be great, and could be very effective. But if a person really isn't ready to change or scared of changing, which by the way, it often is about being fearful, or there's some resistance for a reason. It often isn't just to be difficult generally, although that might be how it presents. But if they're not able to or not ready to, for whatever the reason, we can't make it happen. Now we can give feedback, and if we're giving feedback, one of the social skills, for instance, is using more I messages than you messages. Like I'm really concerned, or I notice, or I'd be happy to drive, but I'd like to put a little criteria here, about no backseat driving kind of thing, or whatever, right? So we can use, we can make requests. We can, I really appreciate my relationship with you. However, it's really difficult when this and this happens. So we can maybe warm somebody up. We can put out an olive branch, so to speak, in hopes that the person might hear that and might be willing to consider it. But if they are like, no way, I'm not ready, I don't want to do it, we
But
can't.
but what could they do if somebody wants to become self-aware?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So
How
more
do they
if
do
they're
it?
ready to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So if somebody's ready, excellent. And again, as a therapist, I love that. And some people come into doing the work either on their own or in therapy in all different levels of the continuum. But if somebody's ready, I mean, often it can just start with very basic. just reflection in terms of, so even some people like to log it. They might keep on their phone or in a journal, or just periodically be like, all right, I am going to log what was, I'm feeling, or something happened. So it could be an event, and sometimes we talk about the ABCs of events. So what's my affect? What's my emotion about it? What behavior happened around that event, or urges of behavior? And the C, the cognition. What were my thoughts around that? And so just even the process of tracking that a little bit more often, or even if it's, once a day, you pick one event that happened and trying to just be more of an emotion scientist around your emotions, it really does increase, uh, it already increases skills, actually. Often that which we track already begins to shift a little bit, which is just an interesting process in itself. Um, and even sometimes people, if they remain a little unsure, like, oh gosh, I have no idea, I don't know what's going on, if they're willing to be vulnerable and to maybe ask a friend or a family member to say, hey, I would love a little feedback. I'm trying to be a little bit more aware of this, or I've noticed that I sometimes shut down in such a situation, or I get excessively angry in that kind of situation. And if sometimes if we can't come to it, asking somebody else will help with that objectivity a little bit more. Um, and then it's the small steps of practice, 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 persistence over time, to be able to just take little skills one at a time and to be working on it. So, but it starts with self-awareness, right? Yeah.
The other day, I was driving with a friend of mine. This is a lesson that I've learned that to me is so vital.
Hmm.
And we're driving, and I was on my phone. I was trying to do something. I was writing something or reading something. And we were in a truck, and the truck kept hitting bumps. And my immediate reaction was to become angry with my friend. But I
Mm.
knew that it wasn't his fault.
Hmm.
And so we actually ended up having a conversation, and I use it as an example to show that just because I think something or feel something doesn't mean I'm reacting to a reality. So while my initial sense is blaming him, a moment's reflection told me, no, he's just driving. He's not doing
Right.
anything wrong. But there was a time in my life when I took my emotions to be primaries. I would get angry, and I thought that was a reflection of the reality. If I'm angry at somebody or over something, that person necessarily did something wrong.
Yes.
And it reminds me kind of something that you talked about, and it's something I came across years ago in a book called, I think, The Brain That Changes Itself. And,
Mm.
and the author talked about getting into our brains basically and manually shifting in order to alter our emotions, our thoughts, our behaviors. And you talk about accessing our internal control panel.
Hmm.
So what do you mean by that, and how do we do it?
Yeah, so that self-regulation domain, I think of that, right? The metaphor, the internal control panel, or shifting manually. That's another way to think about it too. So what I mean by that is that there's many, many skills, dozens and dozens of skills. We couldn't even, probably list them all effectively right now, but um, to be able to know, where, just like we would on a soundboard, treble and bass or volume or whatever, internally, like, okay, how am I doing on my emotional reactivity? How am I doing on my ability to calm, my ability to speak up when I need to, my ability to use good tone of voice, my ability to be clear in my communication, my nuance of vocabulary. So we all are born into this world with certain, maybe certain skill sets around that, and maybe we have good family role modeling in our upbringing, in our family of origin. Maybe we don't, or had good friends in school, or we didn't. But as we recognize, like your example is great, like saying, wow, I was aware that I was getting angry about those bumps, and you were able to without even realizing it. It sounds like, Michael, like, you, maybe all of the work that you've done, that you were able to access that, maybe that emotional lever was starting to kind of ramp up a little bit, and you're like, wait a minute. Okay, an emotion is not a fact, a thought is not a fact. Let me kind of be aware of let me zoom out. What's really going on here? Oh, my friend's not meaning to do this. This is just the situation of the road right now. And that was really, turning the levers on your internal control. So it's being able to actually attune to that and be able to be like, okay, let me, figure out which of my internal controls need work, So if somebody has a big project they're trying to get done, they may need to figure out, okay, I know my motivation gets kind of low when I have a big project. What do I need to do? Like, how do I motivate myself? Do I need to create some incentives? Do I need to put it into small steps? Or, wow, I'm about to be with some family members that drive me crazy. What do I do that's going to allow me to kind of work on my controls to maintain my patience and maintain my empathy and take breaks when I need to, or whatever that is. So that's what I mean. I hope that makes more sense. Yeah.
Sure, it
Yeah.
does. Now,
Yeah.
in another article that you wrote about
Hmm.
changing habits, and you talked about how it's better to start small than rather than go big. And it's reminiscent to me of, I don't know if you're aware of Ben Franklin's self-improvement system, but he
Hmm.
talked about what he would do is he identified 13, I think, virtues that he wanted to cultivate. And what he would do is work on one a week.
Hmm.
And then he would rate himself on how he was doing. And he would let everything else go by the wayside, because he said if you try to focus on everything, you just end up crazy. While I agree with that, I also there's something to be said, and I don't know if the two necessarily are contradictory, but I had a friend of mine, and when we
Hmm.
would be working on issues, he said that he wanted to do what he called kill the nest, right?
Hmm.
Instead of running around trying to deal with the various bees of his poor thoughts and actions, he wanted to get to the root of the problem. And it reminds me of in cognitive behavioral therapy, they have core
Hmm.
beliefs. That
Hmm.
if you shift the core belief, then you can basically attack so many. For instance, I had a core belief of myself for a very long time of being an unworthy human being. That
Hmm.
led me to fears of abandonment, control issues, jealousy issues, everything. And I needed to get inside and access that internal control panel and really work on that core.
Hmm.
But at the same time, it's like if you have a fire, you need to put the fire out rather than worry about what caused the fire. You put the
Right.
fire out first. So, how does the idea of changing small habits or start small, how would that interact with the idea of addressing core issues? Are they compatible? I tend to think they are. I'm just
Yeah.
curious what a professional thinks about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm betting, Michael, that, the first time the idea of that you might have read about changing a core belief, or the first time you identified maybe one of your core beliefs, I bet you didn't change it the first time you heard it, right? It
Oh my good. No,
probably,
it's so hard. It's so
right,
much easier. The truth is to change an immediate action than to change what's at the core of it.
right.
Yeah,
Right. And
for
so
sure.
even that, like even changing a belief or a thought often takes warm up and small steps and hearing it again and again and again, and then in a different context or from a different person that says it slightly differently. So even that I would call almost like small stepping. But yes, in terms of small behavior changes or making habits, yes, I believe, often, it's nothing to say that if somebody wants to go big and start big, I mean, for some people that can work, right? Or kill the nest. And there absolutely are situations, right? Like in a fire, yeah, we're not going to go small, right? Like we're going to go as big as possible, obviously, in an emergency situation. Yes. And if there were fires every day, it would be really difficult to keep that up regularly. So on things like a habit that somebody realizes they want to quit smoking, they want to stop biting their nails, they want to stop yelling at their kids, there are ways to kind of warm that up. Yes, we want that happening. They may want that, oh, I wish that were done yesterday. Um, but more people are likely to be more successful in the long term if they can take the small stepping approach, because sometimes if we go too big or too hard, it's hard to maintain that. It's hard to keep that going. And so I would say it is um, it's not incompatible with this idea of, going big or changing a big core belief, which is really meaningful and has lots of contagion ripple effects that are going to be really helpful. Um, and I would even say in the small stepping of behavior, we sometimes bump up against a belief, So if okay, yeah, the first 3 weeks of changing this habit, not bad, but like, ooh, wow, okay, now I'm into my fourth week of trying this, and wow, I'm bumping up, or it's during the holidays, or it's during being with certain people, and now suddenly I'm bumping up against something that needs a little bit more attention and a little more focus. So,
So,
yeah.
so now that I have a professional here, I'm going to get some therapy myself, maybe. So, an issue I have, a
Mhm.
personal issue, and it relates to exactly what you said. And I actually talked to my friend Brent the other day, my best friend, about this because he and I don't know what you know about me, but I was incarcerated for 25
Mhm.
years. He and I
Mhm.
were
Mhm.
cellmates for 11 of those.
Mm.
And we were in the same block, I think, for 16 years. And we really helped each other to grow and to become better people by telling each
Mm.
other truths that nobody wants to hear.
Yeah.
And so I know how hard it is to change things. And I know it doesn't happen all at once. And I know how many setbacks come. But when it comes to friends or other people, I find myself expecting people, even when they're honest and trying to change, I expect the changes to take place like that.
Yeah.
So when they make progress, it's hard for me to see that progress has been made. I'm seeing everything else.
Mhm. Mhm. Right.
Now, it's good that I'm aware of that, but I want to change it. I want to
Yeah.
stop being because it's, for one, it's an unrealistic expectation, and two, it
Right.
doesn't help the person that you're trying to help. If you're
Right.
nitpicking everything when the person's honestly making strides,
That's right. That's
right?
right. Yeah.
So what
Yeah.
would you say to me? I'm your client and I'm in your
Mhm.
office and I've just laid that out on you.
So if we went back to the internal control panel, what I'm hearing there is that maybe your patience for others change needs a little bit of work, right?
For sure.
And again, I love that you have such self-awareness, Michael, seriously, because
Thank you.
that's key and that's foundational to be able to do that. So you knowing you want to change that is terrific. And so you might even, okay, well, what am I going to put in place that before I maybe criticize my friend or once again obsess about, oh my gosh, I can't believe he's still doing such and such. I'm going to make a little note to myself. I'm going to first notice three things that are better, or three things that I really appreciate about this friend, or three things that I remember that I have gratitude about. I want to maintain this friendship. I don't want to blast him for still doing XYZ, right? So even that's an example of a behavior that people can, just like learning to brush our teeth, we might put in place, like I'm going to orient to something I really appreciate. Um, yeah, what I'm hearing is, like, again, you have the self-awareness, maybe a little bit of that patience, and it's always easier to be, you know, well, I shouldn't say always, but it's often easier, to notice things about others that might drive us crazy. That's why sometimes asking our friends, like, "Hey, I'm trying to work on this. Do you have any feedback for me?" They often can see things we can't see.
Right.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
I like that you mentioned that because there's people listening and people have said this to me. Well, just let people be. You're not in charge of making them better. And that's true. I agree with it.
Hmm.
At the same time, the context that I'm in and the friendships that I've had that are most important to me were based on growth, on
Hmm.
everybody growing. So that meant telling each other flaws.
Right.
So I still am in that space, and the people I associate with, to be perfectly honest, I'm not going to put people around me that are stagnant and don't want to grow. I just
Right.
don't. I don't have
Yep.
patience for it.
Yep.
So the people that I'm friends with, we do want to grow. So we end up, you have to provide feedback to one another. But
Hmm.
another thing, and I realized this just this morning, that I tend to do is I speak like so matter of factly.
Hmm.
Like I can talk about the issues that I have in a matter of fact way, straightforward. What I tend to forget is that when you're talking about other people's problems or issues, family dynamics, they may not be ready to hear it in such a matter of fact way.
Right,
So, what to
right.
me is just a statement of fact, to
Hmm.
them is touching on some of the deepest, psychological, emotional issues that they have.
Right, right,
And I've got to train myself to understand that not everybody is ready to talk, like you're in a clinician conference
right.
about things that you're dealing with, or I'm dealing with rather real people with real emotions, real issues that are often doing the best that they can.
That's right. That's right. So again, you have insight to again, if we're using the control panel, I'm also hearing that maybe some fine tuning of that gentleness, how you package things, maybe a little more kind of warmth versus just straight up direct clinical factoid stuff. It doesn't always work for everybody,
No, no,
right?
no,
Yeah.
no, it does not.
Yeah, yeah. And it may work really well for you, and you might even give your friends permission to say, "Hey, be straight up. Hold me accountable. I just
Yeah.
like don't beat around the bush. Give me the lowdown on that, right?" But
Yes.
your other friends may not all feel similarly.
No, and part of the problem is my friend Brent I mentioned earlier. He and I were so raw with each other.
Hmm.
And it's funny because most people tell me I'm too assertive. Like
Uh-huh.
you got to stop. Brent always used to tell me you got to be more assertive. So when people think I'm too assertive, like this guy is, off the charts with assertiveness.
Uh-huh.
And that was my sort of paradigm, or for friendship and how friendships are when you're growing. And
Right.
I have a hard time remembering that not everybody on the planet is ready for that.
Right. Right. Yeah. No. And again, it sounds like you and Brent are able to be honest with each other for the
Yeah.
most part, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think, so even if we were talking about an intervention, and again, you probably already do this, or with Brent, like you sounds like you're really honest and open with each other. Like one of the things I'll sometimes talk with parents about, or even if somebody needs to say something to their partner, just sometimes an opening statement like, "Hey, I have some feedback for you. Would you like to hear it?" Or I have an observation I made of, we were at this event and I noticed something and I want to share with you. May I? And so often the person might say, uh-oh, right? But if you've asked permission, it's kind of like their ears are much more likely to be open because you've just laid the foundation a little bit and said, let's, let me warm you up. I'm not trying to hurt you. I want to help you. So sometimes
Yes.
little key phrases can make a world of difference in that kind of thing. Yeah,
Absolutely. Thank you so
yeah.
much. Before I let you go, is there anything else that you think we should cover as relates to emotional intelligence?
I just love that it's become such a much more household name, actually, or household word or
Yeah,
words, really, because I think our world would be such a better place if we had more people attending
certainly.
to this on a regular basis. And I think people are. I mean, I think people are much more um, attuned to this, which is terrific. And even, like Sesame Street, how they're like, they used to only do reading and writing and math. And now it's all about social emotional learning. And I love that. I think that that's from all the age ranges that we're really doing that. So I just would encourage people that if they're interested in this and kind of as we've been talking about, rather than like, oh, he should do more of that, she should do more of that. How about we look within and figure out, okay, where are my strengths and weaknesses? Where am I going to do my work? So I would
Yeah,
just encourage because it's changeable, it's contagious, it's teachable. I just would encourage people to keep doing the work. So
excellent.
I think.
Where can people find you and the things that you write?
Yeah, my latest project this year has been doing some articles for Psychology Today online that have been kind of fun for me. I My blog article column is called Metaphors, Mindful Metaphors, because I like to put psychological concepts into small bite-sized pieces using some metaphors. It's just kind of a fun way to do that. I I work at Silver Psychological Services as a clinician. And but I'm really nearing, I'm been there over 30 years and really trying to get to the point of narrowing my caseload, not opening my caseload. So that's why I'm doing my writing, which I really enjoy, and it feels like a nice way to kind of give back to the public. So
Excellent. Well,
yeah,
thank you so much for being with us today. Really
you're welcome.
appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it. Okay.
And for now, this is the Rational Egoist signing out. Let me know what you think of this episode in the comments. Tell me what you think. It's very, very helpful. Till next time.